One, and we're live.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. This is Melnia Cordes. Thank you so much for joining us to part 3 of the Law and Use series. Today, we're talking about our city, our vote, and we're focusing specifically on Intro 1867. Simply asked, can green card holders vote in
Recording
New York
in progress.
elections? As you all know, I'm an immigration attorney. I'm part of the principal of Melnia Cordes Law PC. And one of our subject areas is immigration and how the laws in New York impact the persons that reside there. And we all know, generally coming off of the election from yesterday, that there are only certain persons that can vote in federal and state and local elections. Generally, in order for you to be eligible to vote, you have to be a US citizen. You have to be at least 18 years of age. You have to register to vote, and also you have to meet the residency requirements for each state. Today, we're going to focus on what's going on in New York and whether green card holders can vote. Now, we know green card holders are not citizens. So what is it in New York that would make them eligible to vote? Immigration law is very clear. Aliens are not allowed to vote in federal elections nor in state elections. And so the question begs itself, how is it that we're going to have legislation in New York that would allow green card holders to vote? And simply put, we need to change the law, and this is what Intro 1867 is all about. Bearing in mind, the focus of the legislation is simply to make those who are lawfully here in the US, lawfully green card resident holders, to vote. Also, by extension, those who are authorized to work are also covered under the 1867 legislation. So to give us a more robust idea behind the history of the legislation, we have 3 esteemed panelists with us today that will cover various areas of the Intro 1867 legislation. First, we have Melissa John from Represent We. She's an elementary teacher and co-founder, of Represent We, which is an initiative that focuses on bringing awareness to the legislation to the community of New York City. Then we have Nora Moran. She is the Deputy Director of Policy and Advocacy with the United Neighborhood Homes Organization. This is a very old organization. I think it has a history of about 100 years, and their focus is primarily on advocacy and education within the housing settlements here in New York. So welcome, Nora. She will present a wealth of information on what the organization does and also on the 1867 intro legislation. And finally, we have Matthew Pitt. He is the representative from Councilman Farah Lewis' office. Councilman Lewis is representative of the 45th district, and I do believe she was the first Haitian representative in the council. Let me double check my notes on that. Yes, she was the first woman to represent the 45th district and the second Haitian American woman to serve in New York City Council. Councilwoman Farah Lewis is one of the co-sponsors of the 1867 introductory legislation, which seeks to vest green card holders with the right to vote. So welcome, Matthew. Matthew will provide us with information on the history of the 1867 legislation and why we need it in New York. So without any further delays, I'm going to give Mr. Pitt the opportunity to tell us from his representative, Councilwoman Farah Lewis' perspective, why the 1867 legislation is necessary.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Matthew Pitt from Councilmember Farah Lewis's office. This bill is chiefly important because, as we all know, New York is a city of immigrants. Vast majority of the folks living in New York City are immigrants or are descended from folks who have arrived here from another country. All of them are lawful residents who pay taxes and enjoy more or less the same rights and freedoms as citizens who do live in this country, with the present exception of being allowed to vote. So this is very important because they should be allowed to vote because they pay taxes into the same system that citizens also pay taxes into. And they enjoy the same services that we enjoy, that citizens enjoy. And that's some of the main reasons why I believe in that the city council believes that they should be allowed to vote in, at the very least, municipal elections. Now, the only reason why we can do this for municipal elections is because we can't change any laws on the state side or on the federal side with respect to those elections. So for state, the state legislature will have to put in a piece of legislation or bill or make an amended change to the Constitution via I believe it's a referendum. And for the United States government, they would have to make significant changes, not only on the congressional side, but also make significant changes to the United States Constitution as well.
Thank you, Matthew. Yes. So it's very important for residents in the city of New York to have legislation that will allow green card holders to vote. So we look forward to seeing how this legislation will move from being just a presented bill to something that's been enacted and adopted into law in New York City. Now, at this time, I want to invite Nora to speak on what the substance of this legislation is. And she will present a slide for quick and easy reference.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here tonight. I'm going to share my screen quickly. Okay. Can folks see that okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. So I'm Nora Moran. I'm the Director of Policy and Advocacy at United Neighborhood Houses. We are one of the lead organizations working on the Our City, Our Vote campaign, which seeks to expand voting rights in New York City to green card holders and other people with work authorization so that they can vote in local elections. So very briefly, what would this bill do? Intro 1867 would allow green card holders and people with work authorization who live in New York City to participate in municipal elections. Those elections include the mayor, comptroller, public advocate, borough presidents, the city council, and ballot referenda. This would not apply to any state races or district attorney races, but all of the positions that New Yorkers voted on yesterday, many of those would be included in this legislation. And what's really important about this bill is that it would restore voting rights to nearly 1 million New Yorkers and give them a voice in local elections. Right now, we estimate that in New York City, there are about 1 million people who would be enfranchised by this legislation. They are people who live here, work here, pay taxes here, and are not able to have any say or stake over very local issues. So this would bring them back into the fold. And we actually talk about this as restoring voting rights because for a long time in our city, voting rights were not tied to citizenship. They were only tied to whether or not you owned property. And in New York City specifically, before we abolished our school board system, anybody who lived in New York City could vote in school board elections. They did not have to be a citizen to do so. So like I said, these are individuals who work here, they raise their families here, they pay taxes here, and this legislation would give them a say in the direction of our city. And so, this chart is always very interesting to me because it talks about sort of what is the current voter landscape in New York City. We unfortunately in New York City do not always have very high turnout in local elections. Even though yesterday more people voted than in 2013, it still is a very small portion of all eligible voters. So right now, there are sort of many more people beyond even eligible voters who live in our communities but cannot vote. So this kind of shows how a very small portion of voters often make decisions for our neighborhoods and our communities. And what would happen if we were able to pass Intro 1867 and expand municipal voting rights is that the number of actual voters would go up, the number of eligible voters would go up. We believe that it's better democracy when there are more people who are able to raise their voices, speak up on issues that impact them. It makes our communities stronger and our neighborhoods better, and that's one of the things we're seeking to do with this bill. So when we talk about this bill, we really lift up three words: inclusion, expansion, and restoration. So, including more people who live in our neighborhoods who want to be able to make their voices heard, expanding the electorate, and restoring voting rights to people who had them previously. So I'm just going to put these all up. So this is a question we get a lot, has non-citizen voting existed before? And what about, what about it is important to know? And so yes, for more than 40 years, school boards allowed non-citizens to vote in local elections. Currently New York City residents of any citizenship status can vote in participatory budgeting projects. So different council districts choose to do that. So there are, some options for that now, but it's very limited. And many other parts of America, other towns and cities have actually expanded voting rights to include non-citizens. This includes 10 towns in Maryland, 5 towns in Massachusetts, as well as San Francisco, Portland, Maine, and Washington, D.C. We also know that Chicago is exploring a similar piece of legislation as New York City is. So this is also a concept that's sort of catching on in other major cities in America. And right now, globally, more than 45 countries actually allow immigrants to vote in their elections. So, one of the things that we also hear a lot is, what are the issues that, would potentially change if there were more people eligible to vote in local elections. And all the things listed on the screen right now: police reform, land use, schools issues, sanitation, language access. Those are all things that the mayor and city council make decisions about and have power and control over. And so when, more people are able to vote, they're able to, vote for candidates that align with, their stances and issues on all these different things, just sort of underscoring how important it is for legislation like this to pass. And we also get a question, of why are we fighting for this now? Why is it so important right now? We've never been so close with this legislation to changing the voting landscape in New York City. Right now, half of all frontline essential workers are immigrants. 1 in 5 are non-citizens. We ask ourselves, how can we ask them to risk their lives to keep us healthy, keep the city going throughout a pandemic, but also tell them that, they don't have a say in how their taxes are spent and who represents them in their government. And if Intro 1867 passes in this city council session, we will have an opportunity to have, many more first-time voters in the 2023 election cycle, which is not too far away. We also are very close. This is the first time that this bill has had a supermajority of co-sponsors on it, which is very exciting. And so we feel, very good about this being our time and this being the right time to pass this bill. So, this really, like we said, we really feel like this is the right time for this. And we invite everybody who's watching to take action with us. This code that you can scan, it would send a message to your council member, saying that you support this legislation. You also can go to ourcityourvote.org to get more information about the bill as well. I am going to, let's see.
Awesome.
Stop sharing my screen. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Nora. That was very informative and concise. It just provided a brief overview of the basic information about the Intro 1867 bill and what is needed and what it has enacted, what it has written as a proposed legislation. At this time, I want to invite Melissa John from Represent We to speak on what steps were taken to, one, make this legislation more known within the community, and what steps can be done by members of the community to ensure that there is some active movement in having the legislation presented for arguments before the legislature.
No problem. Hi, everyone. I'm Melissa John, as Melania said, elementary school teacher, Trinidadian by birth. So I would be one of the persons that would benefit from this bill. So it's a personal decision for me to share this within my community, within and outside of my community. And one of the steps that was taken to spread the message of the bill far and wide was, of course, with the creation of Represent We. And because of COVID, there wasn't as much opportunity to be on the ground and meet with folks in person. So having a lot of virtual events, reaching out to members of the community, particularly in Brooklyn, that do a lot of grassroots work. They come in contact with everyone in the community. They have a broad audience, having them sign on to petitions, having them visit the Our City, Our Vote campaign, and most importantly, just getting informed about this piece of legislation, because one of the first questions would always be is this even legal? Like, are you making this up? And it's, yes, it is very legal. It is a proposal that's for city council. It's not the first version of it. And I'm very happy to see that, that it has all the support that it has garnered in this version of it in 2021. So with the hopes that it will become law sooner than later. And as far as what community members can do to continue pushing the message, every time someone hears about the bill, you do some research, you tell someone else about it. Do you have any questions about this? Redirecting folks to different websites, different organizations that are working behind the scenes on the front line to get the information out. So we works in coalition with the New York Immigration Coalition to help support and help amplify this message. For me, particularly amplifying the message throughout the West Indian community, because that's, for me, it's the heart and soul of Brooklyn. So that's very important for my community members to be aware that this bill exists.
Okay. Thank you so much, Melissa. Now, just in terms of general information, so that people can know what area is covered by the legislation, this legislation only covers the 5 boroughs. Simply put, it's a local law, and it's just for the boroughs: Brooklyn, New York, which is Manhattan, Bronx, Staten Island, Queens. Okay, it doesn't extend beyond the boroughs. And it's only a local legislation, and it only affects municipal elections. It doesn't extend to anything that involves voting for like the president or the prime minister or vice president or any of the Senate seats. It doesn't extend to that. As was shown in the slide, it only covers a limited roles, which is similar to what we just had yesterday in the election. It covers the role of the mayor, the role of the public advocate, comptroller, city council member, and borough president, and in some other limited instances. And the reason why we have to bear this in mind is that because we do not want the local law to encroach upon the federal law, or for anyone who holds a green card to run afoul of immigration laws, because it's very important that persons maintain their lawful immigration status so that they can get those benefits. Now, as it relates to what it means for this particular Intro 1867, Nora said that it has a super majority. Matt, can you explain to us what that means in terms of being a member of the city council and having a legislation that has supermajority? Explain to us what that means to the ordinary person.
This means that, just to clarify, it has 34 co-sponsors. So what this means is that this bill has a very high likely chance of being passed if it is brought to the committee for a vote, and if it's brought to the floor at a stated meeting for a vote. So this is very good. Usually we have a requirement that if certain bills have to be heard, there's supposed to be a max number or a minimum number of sponsors on a bill, but the minimum number never usually hits like 34. So the fact that this bill has 34 means there's a very high likely chance of it passing.
Well, that the bill at this point can be vetoed.
Oh, that it can be what? I'm sorry, I didn't catch that last part.
Yes, asking if is it possible for the bill to be vetoed the way it is with the supermajority.
If it hits the mayor's desk and he vetoes it for some strange reason, we can override the veto.
So this is a very strong position to be in, and as advocates, we just want to be clear that this is not the first time this bill has been presented, but this is the first time we've had a position where it's a supermajority, where a majority of the councilmen have voted for the legislation. And so we feel that once the bill is presented, there is a high likelihood that it will be passed. So what can we expect as the next step towards realizing this introductory bill as law? Nora, do you want to
Sure.
help us on
what,
that?
What we're hopeful will happen as a next step is that between now and December, the bill both gets a hearing in the Government Operations Committee in the City Council, because that's the first step for passage, and then that it would go to the floor during a City Council stated meeting for a full vote. That can happen really at any point, but we, are hopeful that it happens by December, because starting in January, there's a new council and bills need to be reintroduced. We kind of have to start over again. So we're hopeful that it happens by December of this year. And really what we're focusing on now as an advocacy coalition is, continuing to even get more council members sponsoring the bill and supportive, and to really call publicly for a hearing and for a vote on the bill going forward.
Melissa, do you know of any upcoming events that are out there in the city that focuses on awareness with respect to the legislation or getting persons involved in bringing the message out?
Sure. Well, as Nora mentioned, the coalition actually had an event occur last Wednesday, which was really a celebratory event for the fact that a supermajority was achieved. So, it was a way to celebrate all the co-sponsors. It was a way to celebrate all of the organizations that have put in the work to bring this to their various communities. At this time, I think the next steps organizations involved is of course still raising the awareness of the bill and then thinking about the civic engagement, because now, okay, I have this ability to vote. What does that even mean? What is that supposed to look like? So that would be the next step for this bill. So stay tuned, follow the Instagram pages to keep up to date with future events.
Yes, I do believe your Instagram is Represent We, and it's full of information over there on what's going on with respect to the introductory legislation. Can anyone give us some idea as to how long the bill has been on the city floor? That's a question that's been asked.
It hasn't hasn't necessarily been on the floor as it's just been referred to the GovOps committee. So this was introduced back in January of 2020, and it's been at committee since that time. So it would just have to have at least 1 or 2 hearings for it to pass in a vote. And then at the next stated after that hearing, it would have to be voted on by the city council. But for now, though, it's still in committee.
Do we have any hearing dates set?
That's a question that needs to be posed to the committee chairman, Councilmember Carrera. He may be able to answer that question.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I guess we have to stay tuned to see what's the next development with regard to having a hearing on the legislation. Just to provide some more clarity on what the bill means for green card holders, Melissa, do you want to speak on areas of impact for current residents in New York?
Sure. So as I said, I'm a classroom teacher, and every day I stand before my students. I teach in the Bronx, and all my career I've taught underserved and underrepresented communities. And I always tell my students it's important to be seen and it's important to be heard. And with the passage of this bill, it gives those immigrant communities an opportunity to be seen, and it gives them an opportunity to be heard. Because I have conversations with my students about what are the things that you need in your community that would make you feel safer, that would be more impactful. And they talk about, playgrounds, we need a basketball court, maybe we need to have a pool, and letting them know, introducing them from a very early age about the voting process and municipal voting, that's the election that really determines how you get those things in your community. So for me, that's where it starts, informing, my young charges and their families. And once I tell them, I have older students, so they're really good about sharing the information and passing it on to their families. And then I have parents that follow up with me and they want to get information about the bill. So it's really on the ground, grassroots, word of mouth, getting the information out there.
Awesome. Yes. So we have to start with the children so that them and their parents can be informed as to what is out there that can impact their lives. We also do know that, quite topical right now in terms of the area of politics is the various legislation that's being presented both at the federal level and within certain states to change the voting laws. And we have to be more aware of the importance of voting. So one of the things that we have to recognize is that there are a large percentage of immigrant population here in New York City. And if those persons are allowed to vote, it would impact the outcome of those voting elections. So we just had the election yesterday for mayor and comptroller. It's a highly contested position, and that's the person that would make a major decisions with regard to our safety and our taxes and our policing, our basic schooling policies, general districting. And so if we have green card holders given an opportunity to vote, then we would have a greater say in who is the mayor, for example, and who is the city comptroller. I mean, most of us were just watching on TV, and most of the persons, we don't know them. We haven't seen the flyers, and they didn't come into our neighborhoods in certain parts of Brooklyn and Queens and the Bronx, but we've seen the ads on TV. What we want to do is to make people aware that as green card holders, you also should have a voice in who is speaking on your behalf in the role of a mayor or in the role of city comptroller. And this legislation is going to pave the way for you to have a say and to determine who will be the next mayor or who will be the next controller or borough president or public advocate, because those are very critical roles that will impact you in your daily lives and your children at school, how much taxes you pay, where you go to vote, whether you have the right to vote, whether you stand in line, whether you get water. I mean, these issues are all in the news every day. So it's very critical that we as residents within the city of New York get more involved. And so we need to, one, be aware of legislation such as this and how it impacts positively on our lives. And two, we need to share the word to other members in our community that there is legislation out there that will positively impact them and allow them to vote and participate in municipal elections. Let's be clear, municipal elections. Also, we have organizations such as United Neighborhood Houses that can provide a plethora of information on what needs to be done to get legislation such as this passed. And we want to commend United Neighborhood Housing for their policy and their advocacy in getting legislation such as this out there. And we have amazing council reps such as Farah Lois. She's been on the city council. I think there's more than 300 legislation that she's presented, on various areas, and she's actively involved in this particular legislation, pushing it towards a hearing. So we want to thank you and want to commend City Council Farah Lois for her participation and involvement in sponsoring this legislation. Someone posed a question in the chat: how would the bill impact sanitation? Nora, do you want to speak on that?
Well, it would allow individuals to vote for candidates who align with, their positions and perspectives on, sanitation. That is a city-run service, so it does allow people to vote and pick candidates, based on the issues that they care about. And, sanitation is a great example.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So we have some questions coming in from Facebook. Feel free to type your questions in the chat if you're looking at us on social media or Instagram, New York Carnival Instagram. Please type your chat in. If you're on Cordis Law and you want to pose a question, feel free to send us a direct message or send a message on the Reactors Facebook page. We will answer your questions. We're coming up close to the 7:30 hour. And at this time, I just want to reiterate a few things. This legislation is a proposed legislation. It has not yet been enacted as law. It is our hope with the supermajority that the legislation will be passed at the upcoming hearings, which have not yet been scheduled, but it will be passed, and that is our hope. So we want to encourage all our listeners and our green card holders to actively contact their city council reps and ask for this bill to be put to a hearing. Just from an immigration perspective, because the bill has not yet been passed, we want to make it clear that green card holders are not authorized to vote in state and federal elections. This bill only addresses local, or what is known as municipal, elections within the city of New York. So if you're outside of the 5 boroughs, this bill does not affect you. Also, to be clear, if you were to vote within any of the elections and you're a green card holder or you're just authorized to work, you can face a fine and imprisonment up to a year. So let's wait and see for this particular legislation to be passed and for that right to be conferred on green card holders before you take any steps in voting or participating in any regard in going to a voting booth and affixing your selection for a particular candidate in a federal or state election. That is our legal disclaimer. So, So whilst we wait, Melissa, do you want to give us a final wrap up before we go?
Sure, just for everyone that's tuning in, just continued support, continued in being informed about the bill, continued talking about and holding candidates, holding elected officials, holding their feet to the fire. As everyone on the panel has said and shared, that immigrants, we are the fabric, we are the cornerstone of New York City. We contribute to the finances, we pay our taxes, we own businesses, we own homes here. So we should be able to participate in the political process. We should be able to participate in having a decision in the representative that can decide what our community, what our day-to-day experiences look like. So for anyone, again, tuning in, please follow the campaign website, Our City, Our Vote, and the various organizations that are out there continuing to raise the awareness of this bill.
Thank you. Matthew, before we wrap up, is there any final words you want to add?
Yeah, I just want to thank both yourselves and Ms. Chambers for inviting me to this event, allowing me to speak. And our office does believe that this bill is very important. As you already know, we're a sponsor, and this bill is very beneficial to all of the permanent residents and the green card holders who do live in the city, who do pay taxes, who do participate in many other aspects of our government, especially our municipal government. And this is a right that should be conferred to them as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. And Nora Moran, any final words?
Just thank you so much for hosting this event this evening. I think it's really important that we talk to as many people as possible in New York City about this bill and how important it is. So it's great to have spaces like this to be able to have these kind of events. Definitely want to encourage people to check out ourcityourvote.org for more information and to get involved. And also just a thank you to Councilmember Lewis for being a co-sponsor on the bill. It's really wonderful.
Thank you. Okay, so Our City, Our Vote campaign is in full swing. I want to thank all of our panelists today, Ms. Nora Moran from United Neighborhood Houses, Matthew Pitt, representative for Council Farrah Lewis's office, and Melissa John, founder of Represent We, for participating in this informative panel on the green card right to vote within the city of New York. I also want to give a special thank you to the board of directors of WEACDA for hosting us and organizing the Law and You series. This is part 3 of an ongoing program to educate the public and Brooklyn community on what the laws are and how it will benefit and impact our community in a positive way. Thank you also to our host, DJ Spice, for accommodating us in technical capacity. And a special thank you to Karen Chambers, director at WEACDA, for always facilitating us. I am Melnia Cordes, principal at Melnia Cordes Law PC. You can find me on Instagram at Cordes Law or on my website, melniacordeslaw.com. Thank you, and I will see you again on the 3rd Wednesday of July. That will be July 21st, I believe, where we'll be discussing voluntary administration and what options are available to you if your loved one had passed away during COVID, to obtain letters of administration and probate for the estate. I look forward to seeing you then. Thank you all and have a great evening.